Robert Cobb, and was in the United States Navy and was a commander. Flew F-4s and 25 and a half years. Vietnam was a great place for a young aviator to fly low and fast. It was an exercise in flying in very bad weather, lots of night flying, and the Navy kept a pace there that was beyond what they would normally do if they hadn't had a commitment to have somebody in the air all the time. Let's still go back to the beginning. I went to the University of North Carolina. I was a math major and I was physically fit, and at the end of 4 years I wasn't a great student, but the Navy came calling on the campus and said, would you like to take these tests for aviation? And I did very well. They flew me to Norfolk and for a physical, and on the 15th of September 1965 I went to Pensacola and started a Navy career. I knew absolutely nothing about the Navy or flying or anything, and at the beginning I was a pretty scared guy. But it didn't take long to get acclimated. In 13 weeks they turned you into an officer. They had some of the most amazing enlisted people there that in the first week to strip off 4 years of education and turn you into somebody that they could mold into being what they wanted. So I went through the whole training command by going to Pensacola, Meridian, Mississippi, Kingsville, Texas, and then I got my wings in the spring of 1967. Then it's San Diego and F-4 Phantoms, and by November of 1967 it was deploying time. We're on our way to Vietnam by way of Hawaii, and just about 3 days before Christmas 1967 we started operating on the USS Kitty Hawk in the Gulf of Tonkin. Just enough to get enough day traps, and so as the big carrier, the one that had F-4s on it rather than F-8s, we could transition into flying at night, because that's what we did a lot of in nighttime, and the Gulf of Tonkin weather made that relatively challenging. And so the opportunity for flying low and being ready to do things was there all the time. Half the time the fighter squadrons carried racks with bombs, the other time we were the combat air patrol. So pretty regularly every other line period, which usually lasted, it could last a long time. The first one lasted 60 days, which they told us was a record for anybody doing that. And we were dropping bombs. It was an interesting start to that cruise, just going back a little bit. We left San Diego, and within 12 hours we were on water hours. Evidently one of the evaporators had messed up, and the freshwater supply was precious, and so the cruise started with wonder what the heck's going on here. The first cruise there in the Gulf of Tonkin was as a fighter pilot, there was nobody that was coming off the beach. We and the other ships that were there were generally either 2 or 3 carriers, kept a combat air patrol in the air all the time, and no one ever came out to challenge us at all. So most of the more exciting stuff happened when we had the bombs on. And the F-4s didn't do a lot of precision bombing because our equipment was a Mark I eyeball, but we dropped 10 500-pounders many times in targets of a variety of places. Either we would get the target or we would fly over Vietnam, or if the weather was bad we'd go into Laos and have a combat spy spot. The squadron lost 6 airplanes that cruise. Not a single one of them directly to the enemy, always because the weather was bad, people make mistakes, and there was 4 crew members lost in 2 airplanes, and CF-4 is a 2-place airplane. Got plenty of opportunities to fly low, and we would have a destroyer up on the northern SAR, and at the end of a cap you would come back to the ship and you'd been saving gas the whole time. So going by the ship, the northern SAR, search and rescue, was the opportunity to give them an air show, and so we usually did. low and fast, and that was fun. The ship environment was really amazing. The Kitty Hawk, of course, was fuel powered, and so the stat gas was there, and as the ship was meandering, getting ready to turn into the wind, and you weren't turning the airplane, you could really sweat in the cockpit. I can remember many times, you know, you wouldn't put on your mask until you had to, because after you put on the mask, the sweat would pool right here on top of the mask, and on the cat shot it would go right into your eyes, which was very exciting, because that prevented you from seeing very effectively for a second or two. But after a while you took the cat shots on muscle memory, and you really didn't need to see everything. So that first cruise went 10 months like that, and it was really, you know, for a 25, 26-year-old guy, that was pretty exciting stuff to roar off the deck in your F4 and go out and do things. On the other hand, the effects of what you were doing weren't really known, because you didn't get to see exactly what the bombs hit on the ground. We made one pass, and you didn't stick around to count the matchsticks on the ground at all. Okay, that's the first cruise at 10 months. Came back home, we recycled through the States. Kitty Hawk comes home, we do more training, and then I deploy for another 6 months on the next one. Actually, the cruise lasted 7, but it was 6 months. There's port visits and all, which are always interesting. You go into Japan and Hong Kong and places like that, and you just spend money freely, because obviously there's things to buy, and you want to go home with something, and you stick it in the overhead in your ship and do things with it. At the end of the second cruise, I had orders to the United States Naval Academy to teach, and I had not been there before, and we were in Hong Kong. We had come back off the Sea of Japan, where we were the last time. There'd been an EC-121 shot down, and for some reason we were up there and out of the Gulf of Tonkin, and anyhow, we were in Hong Kong, ready to had a ticket home in my hand. We just left the ship. It was July 1969, and so on the way to Kowloon, where the airport is in Hong Kong, I see over the bunch of about 30 Chinese heads a TV set of Neil Armstrong coming down the ladder and stepping on the moon. And so I always thought, what an amazing thing. You go out and carry ordnance against people, then you go into Hong Kong, where the city is a vibrant city, and you don't expect, and there was no indications there was a war at all of any kind. And here's a guy stepping on the moon, and I got orders to the Naval Academy, and I thought, you just can't have things like that put together. It's just too amazing. And so that really wrapped up my Vietnam time. Lots of flying, lots of low flying, but no engagements with any MiGs. We saw some a couple of times, but the rules of engagement and the controllers on the ship didn't want any piece of them for reasons unknown. Second cruise, we didn't lose any airplanes. It was a better show. The stress of combat was one thing, and you certainly were concerned about it. You know, you worried about a Siri thing. You worried about a problem if you had an airplane and you went down, how you would do all that stuff. And of course, I'd been to Siri school and all that things. But the major stress was just getting back aboard ship for a couple of reasons. One, it was difficult at night. And two, you had every one of your contemporaries watching the TV screen and listening to the landing signal officer give instructions to the pilot or not at night as to, you know, how things were going. And they could obviously hear when you bolted on the roof and it was time to come around for another one. So I'm sure that heart rate and perspiration accentuated during the night landings more than combat stuff. It just had to, because, you know, you were going to review every single one of those right on the, you know, with the landing signal officer about how you did well and how you didn't, and you were under the gun. And it was never something that you took for granted. In the daytime, you knew you could land the airplane safely every pass, as long as the deck wasn't moving horrendously. But at nighttime, there was so many variables that you did not know that that was going to happen every time. And there were several times where it took 3 passes to get aboard. And I wasn't the best at it, but I wasn't the worst, but it was certainly, it got your attention every time. We just did an awful lot of boring holes and saving gas and then dumping gas on the way back. I have absolutely no idea how much fuel I dumped in my career, but every time you had a cap mission, because you had to have a maximum fuel level to stay combat ready, and you had you could only come back with 5,100 pounds of gas in the airplane to land, then you usually had to dump gas. And so we dumped thousands of pounds of gas almost every cap mission. And that was just a matter of course. And getting rid of the fuel was sometimes really exciting because you could only dump so fast. But you could put one engine in afterburner and the other at idle, and you could burn more gas, especially if you put the airplane in buffet. There was a lot of ways to get rid of gas, and we used them all. Because you really didn't want to land on the deck. You know, you had to have the dumps closed by that time. That didn't mean all the fuel was out of the dumping mechanism, so sometimes when we landed, I know that the dumps must have put a little extra fuel on the deck. You really learn to trust other people as far as, you know, to really trust them, but only as far as you have to. That is, if you had a way of backing up where you were going or what the navigation of your leader was, and you had, you know, obviously the radar intercept officer in the back seat had his own navigation, so you could back that up, and that's what you tried to do. You know, you trust the other person implicitly. You're flying somebody's wing, you've got to watch them 100% of the time. Only, you know, and so the eyeballs could only go away for so long before you became excited that wasn't going to work. I had a couple of interesting things happen when I flew. I was once on a guy's wing who took me into a cloud. He said, just for practice, that was so dense, I'm right on his wing, I can't be more than, you know, 6 or 8 feet from his airplane, and he went out of sight. Absolutely disappeared. And that's, you know, and you wait 1 potato, 2 potato, and he doesn't come back in sight, and that just makes your heart stop because the cloud is so dense. And so you come inside the cockpit and you get away from him, and then you have to tell him on the radar you went out of sight. And when that's the squadron CO, that's not really very interesting stuff. But you know, when the cloud, you know, as he goes away, he goes away. And if you just hang there and do nothing, eventually you hit him probably. I had an airplane on the FDR that somehow, when you start up an airplane, you do a flight check, a control check. You can run the controls through, the guys on the outside look to see everything is working the way it's supposed to work. Somewhere between there and getting on the catapult, that disconnected. But I didn't know that. And so I get on the catapult, everything feels absolutely perfect. I put the airplane in afterburner and I salute, which means I'm ready to go. Fortunately, there was 2 or 3 checkers underneath the airplane that all said that something didn't look right on the airplane. Because if it had launched me, I'd been dead. Because the stick was not connected to the stabilator back there at all. And after I got out of burner and they suspended the catapult and I watched out, the stick, which is normally connected to the stabilator, and you have to use the button on the stick to control the nose gear steering, which you need as you, the stick is on its own, moving, full throw, front and back. And I'm just along for the ride. So I feel very fortunate because on an F4, when you launch it in that position, the stabilator is going to go full nose up, the airplane is going to immediately pitch down off the catapult, and you have about, in the front seat you probably have 2 seconds, the guy in the back probably has 3 seconds, and you're dead. So if they'd launched me, I wouldn't be here. So everything's a bonus after that. So when I got back and got out of the Navy and taught school for 20 years, that was all on extra time. Met lots of very capable people, and only a few in my Navy career that were not very capable. So, rest of the Navy career, went to Naval Academy, taught things there that I had never had any knowledge of at all. It was by far the worst tour of my Navy career. And left there and came back down to the East Coast, where I prepped for a squadron to go to the Mediterranean. And I did that on the old FDR, which is now, I'm sure, cut up in some place. And by that time, you know, I'm an old hand, so you can fly and scare yourself when you're older as opposed to when you're younger, and that's about the only difference. Flying in the Mediterranean, though, wasn't, you know, pushing the envelope like we did in Vietnam. After the Mediterranean, we went down to Key West. Key West is where the East Coast does their fighter training. It's really the East Coast Top Gun. But it's better than that, because in Key West we got to fly both the fighters and the bogies as instructors, which is really good for the ego, because if all you do is fight in a position where you're going to win or lose all the time, the ego takes more effect. And since when you're the bogey, you should be getting beaten up, but you usually didn't. When you're the fighter, you should be winning all the time, but you often didn't, because you have students to train, and that's the mission. And so we did that in Key West for a little over 2 years. And then the Navy career went to a variety of other, after that I came back to the Eisenhower and was the aircraft handler. I also then went out to Texas and taught new guys how to fly. But by that time it's 1979, and so I've flown for 12 to 14 years or so, and that's the end of the flying part of my Navy. But after that it was Naval War College, and then I did 3 years in Naples, Italy on the Allied Forces Southern Europe, AF South.